Hey guys, welcome back to the YouTube channel. This time we're talking about how to turn your non-vegan macros into vegan macros and make it fit in a vegan diet.
Now the reason why we felt like this video was so important to address is because typically we see that one of the biggest barriers for people is when they're coming from a non-vegan diet with non-vegan macro splits and eating a certain way, part of them wanting to change over is figuring out, how do I make that transition? How do I integrate from what I was doing into this new way of eating and living, but to make it work? So there's this period where people are concerned about, how am I going to make that shift? And so this is why this video is so important, because basically we're going to break down for you the various ways to do it, what to think about when you're making this transition to make sure that it works perfectly for you.
Alright, so first thing we're going to cover in this video, we're keeping it really simple and concise for you. Essentially, there are two pathways that you can take to figuring out your macros on a vegan diet. So two different ways to do it. We're going to start with number one.
First way is the easier way. It's the way that most people start out, especially if you're already into fitness and stuff, because there's less things you have to worry about. There's less variables, basically. And the first pathway is essentially where you take your animal-based protein / fat, so your chicken or your egg or your fish or whatever it may be, and you replace it with a high-protein plant-based alternative.
So with this approach, your macros stay exactly the same. Yeah. Whatever macro split you had before, you can keep the exact same macro split, but instead of your animal products, you're going to insert these products instead.
For example, if you wanted to substitute things like egg whites or chicken breast, for example, for a plant-based alternative, you use things like seitan and a very clean mock meat. So like Beyond Meat, the Crumbles, for example, is a good one.
For any of your other animal sources that have a bit higher fat content, like your red meats, whole eggs, things like that, you're going to substitute either tofu, tempeh, or TVP, the textured vegetable protein, because those have a little bit of protein and healthy fats, so they're perfect substitute for those other animal foods.
So basically that is your first approach. That's the most simplistic one. That's the easiest one to execute. You're basically just taking your plant-based alternative and inserting it in with your animal-based protein would normally exist. You have those different ones you can go from, so try them all. Draw on all of them and integrate them all into your plan and see what works best for you.
And keep all of your other carbohydrates and fat sources the same. Now let's talk about pathway number two, the second way that you can do this.
So the second way is the way that we approach it and the way that we actually think is better. And it's basically re-engineering your macronutrient splits.
It's a little bit more complex, but it gives you more variety of foods and it makes your diet a lot more enjoyable. In this pathway, there are essentially 5 steps that you need to take.
The first and most fundamental thing to focus on is total calories first. Now, we always say predominantly from a whole food plant-based diet as opposed to vegan junk food, for example. But the most important thing ultimately when it comes to muscle building and or fat loss is going to be your total calorie intake as your main focus. So the first thing you want to do is, whatever your goal is, make sure that your total calorie intake, including fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, is in alignment with that goal.
The second step, the best way to know what your total calories should be, is to track your own body, how your body responds. You can start by tracking just the foods that you normally eat. So don't change anything about your diet yet. Be totally honest. Just track what you eat for a couple of days and add it all up and see what your total calories you've been consuming. Then when you start to make changes, whether you go up to build muscle or if you drop your calories to lose body fat, you just want to do it a little bit at a time, so like 100 to 200 calories, and then check your results. Do this like weekly or every 2 weeks. You want to either, I'm saying either because there are different ways that you can measure depending on what your triggers are mentally. So if you know you can't weigh yourself on the scale because it messes you up mentally, don't weigh yourself. But you can weigh yourself on a scale. You can do circumference measurements with a measuring tape. You can take pictures and photos, selfies of yourself, because you want to see the visual of how your body is changing. If you have a positive response, if you're trying to build muscle and you're gaining 1 to 2 pounds a week, then you're doing good. Keep your calories where they are. If you're losing 1 to 2 pounds a week, you're good. Keep your calories where they are. If you're not getting the response that you want, then you either drop your calories or increase them by another 100 calories each time.
Number
the
3.
Third point.
So when you approach things like this, the most important thing to get through your head is that typically you don't need as much protein as you think. Now, we are not of the nature of that protein's not important. Like all these micro and macronutrients are important. But typically the average person massively overshoots their protein requirements because we just think more is better, right? The good thing about this is when your protein requirement drops even a little bit, it opens the door for more fats and carbohydrates to come in so you can get a more diverse range of whole plant foods into your diet to begin. And if you are... Hold your horses. And if you're really curious and want to learn more, our good friend Dr. Garth Davis has this book, Protein Aholic. He breaks it down, guys, into detail about protein in society and what we really need to focus on. So it's a great book. Awesome, dude. Check it out because it's going to give you a different insight into protein requirements than what you've conventionally been taught.
And it has some recipes in the back. Ooh. And a really good thing about this book, especially for people who are non-vegans, who are going vegan and have they want to question a lot of things. This book, this whole section here
is cited research.
Cited research.
It's like a book in itself.
Papers. And so whenever he talks about something in the book, there's a number. You find the number back here, and you can see exactly the research paper that he's talking about.
Number 4.
So the 4th step is just to know how much protein you need. Start with that first. What do we recommend?
What we normally suggest to shoot for, and this is just a ballpark figure, an average. It's not going to take into account your training volume and output and your
goals. Just to get you started, keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate.
Yeah, is 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. So typically what you'll find is that a lot of conventional thinking is 1 gram per pound of body weight, right? So if I'm 205, 210 pounds, that's about 210 grams of protein a day. I found for me that is just not needed. If I go to 0.6 to 0.8, that range can be from 120 to 160, 170 grams max per day. And number 5 is basically then deciding with your carbohydrates and fats if you like large volumes of food that are more carbohydrate dense, or if you like lower volume but higher density portions that are higher in fat.
So you start with your protein number that we just talked about in the last step. Now your protein and fats are like a sliding scale. You can adjust those based on what you like, what you need, your lifestyle, all those things. So for example, Fraser and I do completely different splits. So I don't like a lot of volume of food because I don't like to feel bloated. And especially right now because I am pregnant, I already have a lot going on in here. So like to add a lot of volume of food, I feel humongous. So I like to eat a lot of healthy fats like nuts, seeds, nut butters, avocado, coconut, hummus. Those things get my calories up without having to take up a lot of space in my belly. Whereas Fraser is the opposite. He likes volume of food because the volume makes him feel full and satisfied. So he eats more carbohydrates like rices and what else?
Rice, potatoes, and just generally more green vegetables too. So I have a lot of fibrous vegetable volume. And because I like to get more volume, I keep my fats just a little bit lower. And it's not because I'm, avoiding fat. It's just because I recognize that if I add in too much fat as well, I'll spill over with my total calorie intake. So the cool thing about this is recognizing that your fat and your carbohydrates are like a sliding scale. And you can play around with both to see what you feel best using.
And that is it. So keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. In summary, here we go, real short and sweet for you. 2 pathways. 1, you can keep your macro split exactly the same. Just substitute those plant-based proteins instead of your animal protein.
So simple, guys.
Pathway number 2 gives you more variety and might actually be healthier for you because you end up with a lot more micronutrients. That pathway is just making sure that you start with your total calories. Then take your protein number that we already gave you, lock that in, and then adjust your carbs and fats based on what you enjoy and what gives you the best results for your body.
So guys, try both these pathways. See what one works best for you. let us know in the comments, like what did you feel worked for you? What was your challenge? We're curious to know in terms of like more content to put out in future to help you guys refine this process and make it easier for you.
And if you have any questions to elaborate on this, drop them in the comment section below. We'll answer your questions either in the comments or we'll do an extra video on something if we need to elaborate. And if this was helpful to you, please like the video, subscribe to our channel so that you'll get all of our videos. We're doing at least one a week.
Yeah.
And share this with your friends so that we
Get
can
it out there,
encourage more
guys.
people to
That's
go
what we
vegan
gotta do, right?
and help make it easier for them to succeed. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.